So we've talked about functions, both pre-made, for example, alert in normal JavaScript or this .click in jQuery. We've also talked about custom functions. So this calculate function that we've written and declared ourselves up here. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is another pretty critical concept in not just JavaScript, but most programming languages, is variables. So variables are a way of temporarily storing some data in memory. So what the hell do I mean by that? Well, let's say that in my alert, I didn't want this hello world to be written directly in my function call. I wanted to store it in a variable somewhere else, so potentially I could edit it, and then I wanted to use that in my alert. So how do we declare a variable? How do we write a variable? Well, in ES5, we use the var keyword, function keyword for functions, var for variables. And again, we need to give it a name. So this one I'm going to put as alert string. And then we need to set it equal to something. We need to assign it a value. So I'm going to put in my hello world. Now, this chunk of data, this string that says hello world, is being assigned to this place in memory under the variable name alert string. So that means anywhere else in my code that I use the reference alert string, it will refer to the value assigned here, this hello world string. So how can I use that? Well, for example, in my alert function call, if I put in alert string, no quotes because I'm referring to a variable, and I run my code, when I click that button, I still get my hello world in my pop-up. So it's being applied, it's being declared as a variable on this line. Alert string is now equal to this string, and then it's being applied in this function call. Excellent. So how is that useful? How is that useful to us in any way? Well, if we link this back to our calculator, the next step, I have my function linked to a button click. That's great. But I need to be able to get the values out of this input fields, before I can do any kind of calculation or output some new information onto the page. So variables are going to be useful because if I can get the value out of those input fields, I can store them in a variable, and then I can use those variables to perform some calculations. So I'm going to create two new variables. One is going to be called input1 value. And for now, I'm just going to set that equal to 0. And I'm going to create a second one called input2 value. And I'm going to set that equal to 0 as well. Now, before I go any further, you might notice that with my naming convention, something about my naming conventions. So in our HTML, all of our IDs, when I have two words, they are lowercase hyphenated. And this is typically the way that you see IDs, classes, attribute names, anything in HTML or CSS is usually lowercase hyphenated. JavaScript, for function names and for variable names, we have something called camel casing. So if I have a 1, 2, 3 word variable name, the first word is lowercase, the second word is capitalized on the first letter, as is every subsequent word after that. So this is a sort of finer point of clean code, finer point of creating better code, essentially. But for the rest of the video, I'm going to be using this camel case structure for any function or variable names in my JavaScript. So last thing I want to do in this video is to get the values out of these input fields. So the way that I'm going to do that, I'm going to use my jQuery selector again. And I need to go and get hold of this first input field. And I can use this ID first number because I've differentiated between my two input fields. I can get hash to select to tell the browser I'm looking for an ID, and then the name first number. So this will go and get hold of my first input field, and to get the value out, I can use a jQuery function called .val. Now, in the next video, we'll do the same for the second input, and then we'll see how we can use those values